Good day, Britt. It's Vincent here after our communication, and kindly you offered your email. But in the spirit of where I said about constant iterative development and the fail fast or launch fast, fail fast, I thought, well, you know what? Let's just make this an audio visual in all its rough round the edges, possibly more noise than signal. But I thought it was a good way of demonstrating some ideas. So this is entirely free form. If you like jazz, which I'm kind of partial to, then think of it like that. I'm literally just extemporising as we speak. Though obviously, if there was any future collaboration, it'd be far more scripted. But for now, just a sample, an amuse-bouche, shall we say, of what they are. So my concept, or my idea, as I mentioned about podcasts, is a podcast around the theory of information and how almost anything, and thus the scope is so wide, can be viewed through a lens of theory of information theory, and can be built around that as an instructive. And as I said, my initial thought would be somewhat replicating the rest is history, where it wouldn't just be a podcast for amusement purposes. I mean, it would be entertaining, I hope, but it would also be a valuable learning, but would also come with a community, as the rest of history has, based around the Discord server and the meetups they have, and then the subdivisions into different periods. And it's incredibly lively, and they've built this community from the ground up, and the community has built itself, always rather than a top-down. So it provided the infrastructure and has some light touch moderation, but the hosts get involved and the producers of the show, etc. Anyhow. And has a membership structure which you can pay for. So therefore it has a fee-paying element should you wish. Anyhow, so I randomly thought, well, okay, so what could an episode look like? And you could do sort of independent standalone or series explaining sort of larger concepts. But I plucked one out of the air. So the current thing du jour, the film du jour, is Napoleon. So I take a bit of an interest because I was born exactly 200 years to the day after Napoleon, almost in the same hour. So there's a little bit of self-indulgence there. But what really fascinates me is not the glory, so the rise and the downfalls are often the most interesting parts of somebody's career, not their triumphs. And in his case, I have particular fascination for his exile on St. Helena, the last 6 years of his life. And St. Helena itself is an amazing, fascinating, and if we think of things in terms of being information rich and how much surprise they hold, then St. Helena is an incredible concentrated concentration of information, a real compression, fantastic in terms, which I won't go into right now, but we'll probably lead on to. So Napoleon was exiled there by the British in 1816. And why? Why didn't they execute him? Why didn't they choose this incredibly barren, the most remote place on earth? Would take you 40 days to get to. Only got an airport 5 years ago, so it held the title of one of the most extreme places. And it is now a British Crown dependency, a former colony, and has been for over 400 years. But it is basically an extinct volcano in the middle of the Atlantic. And the British knew if they were to martyr, the British Empire knew if they martyred Napoleon, that would be an explosion or unintended consequences. So they didn't know the amount of surprise that could happen should they kill him, should they make him into a martyr. And so they could either kill the man, which was off the table, or they could kill the information flow. And that's exactly what they did. They, by exiling him there, and the lockdown they placed upon the cordon sanitaire they put around him is extraordinary. 7,000 troops were posted on the island, 2 schooners consistently, one going clockwise, one going anti-clockwise, round and round the island 24 hours a day. And, which again, part of which I'd like to feed in some of the work that you've done. This is also an era which is the last bastion of pre-electric information communication. And as a demonstration of this, they had the semaphore system. I have the names of the guy who invented it and a huge background on the study and of that. But they had one right outside Napoleon's house, and they had just on the boundaries of his on the house on Longwood House, and another one attached to the governor's office in Jamestown or outside Jamestown. And the governor was kept aware. The relationship between Governor Lowe and Napoleon is a fantastic information exchange in and of itself. But every movement was to be communicated directly straight to using this advanced semaphore system, using the flags and the lights at night. Which again, say this was an episode, we could talk about how the line of sight, etc. But this was the most complex system that obviously Napoleonic France, they had developed the semaphore system. So it was around about this time you have the very last flourishing. This was the last time that these forms of communication were in operation. Britain actually decommissioned its semaphore towers after Napoleon was exiled on Elba, and then very quickly had to re-establish all of them again when he escaped Elba. And this is another reason for exiling him and locking him down on St. Helena, because he was such a massive source of surprise. His ability to communicate new information, they had no other way. They knew they had to contain it. So almost like with your demonstration of the perfect secrecy, because they hadn't understood, all they could do was put him in the locked box and lock the key and try to have it. They had a 60-mile exclusion zone. They had semaphore. They had towers that could spot any approaching ship up to 60 kilometres away. Enormous fortifications and gun barrages around it. It was owned by the East India Company. And they basically, it was stripping Napoleon's capacity to communicate and stopping his ability to both receive. Every single thing he received was censored, highly censored. And you were banished from the island if you were caught trying to impart any other kind of information. So it's interesting, I thought that it would be viewing the Napoleonic or the Napoleon saga through an information theory lens. That or what was happening on St. Helena was this attempt to curtail him being an information source, and that led to the decline. That Napoleon went into such a rapid decline. This was the worst fate he could imagine. He'd imagined himself either. He actually originally thought he was going to retire to an English. They were going to allow him to retire to an English village as a squire, and it was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. Nice idea, Napoleon, but you kind of shot your bolt after Elba. We can't really have you wandering around the British countryside. So after his surprise return after his return from Elba, this was we have to lock this man down. He has to have no capacity whatsoever to communicate surprise, for him to have information that we don't have absolute control over. So it was very much it was an information war, purely an information war. And I thought that, the British ended up using their information system, another form of the most advanced information system, to keep an eye on tracking his information system. So a kind of recursive information system was going on in order to curtail his information. So I thought that was fascinating. And then, let's say this was a podcast, the island itself was the absolute epicenter of the British slave trade, and then the absolute epicenter of the anti-slave trade after abolition, as it was home to the West Africa Squadron, who were involved with intercepting slaving ships from other nations, including the United States, Brazil, France, and Germany, who were Dutch, who came very late. And so for 100 years they operated out of St. Helena. Now it became the home of the world's first refugee camps. And those three of them, because obviously a lot of slaves, unfortunately, were in a terrible state even after they'd been intercepted. So they would bring them to St. Helena. There would be an attempt to repatriate them, but just due to the geography, and they would have no idea of where the slaves had been collated from various areas. So they had some points they could drop them off, but you could end up thousands of miles from home. Many of them chose to settle on St. Helena, and it's still, to this day one of the most genuinely racially and ethnically mixed places, because it was such a hub of all of the transport systems around the world before the Suez Canal was opened. But there has been recently, they knew of their existence, but now they have been properly set aside as archaeological. But they have found 4 cemeteries which contain, unfortunately, up to 15,000 corpses of slaves who had not even made it to the Middle Passage, across the Middle Passage. But this has become an incredibly important thing now, because there's so little trace of the origins of slavery in the New World, of the being able to trace via DNA, etc., to where this provides an incredibly important source of being able to figure out where tribes and where people were being taken from. So yeah, again, St. Helena has continued to be this incredible source of information for such a tiny, tiny extinct volcano it's inaccessible. So it's a fascinating story. The incredible internal war that went on between the governor and Napoleon, both of them pitting their wits and going for years without speaking and communicating in incredibly different layers. So information piled upon information piled upon information. So this obviously would be something that sort of slaps right bang in terms of information theory and the development of it, as it's really just before the massive acceleration after the invention of the institution of electricity. And a final thing, the British Admiralty were approached in 1816 by a scientist, I think his name was Rowe. Again, if this was a real thing, I would have all the details. And he presented them with what was basically a telegraph system, a system for sending messages much faster down a series. He'd built his own underground layers of electrical wire and proven it. He presented it to the British Admiralty, and they turned him down basically because they were fed up with the amount of applications for new ways of communicating that had been received by them, all these various different things people had proposed. So they basically told him to go away. We haven't got time to go through all of these inventions. So they missed out on a 40-year gap where they could have had telegraphy. So again, the missed opportunities of information, the fact that we are... it's often, again, as the James Burke connections have said, there's often an incredible piece of happenstance or serendipity that happens or doesn't, as the case may be. So that's just a brief. So I'm coming up to nearly 15 minutes, but that would be the kind of thing. I've done a few radio interviews and stuff. I think I might give you an example of what I've done. I personally don't like the sound of my own voice, but I've been told it's pretty listenable too. I know you are, so that's a bonus there. So I'm incredibly, ridiculously so. This is a small version of Napoleon. This sits next to my computer. It is it's a clay tablet from ancient Sumeria, and on it, I don't have the definition. I can show it to you better on a better screen. Is the Sumerian word, the proto word for wheat, and it sits next to it because I really like the entire history of information and how we first started to try to encapsulate it and the journey it's come. And all of this, I think, really ties into this concept of, with what's happening now with AI, and that idea of, as I mentioned, about understudden being the original of understood to be amongst. And the more people are amongst what information theory is, and that's how AI is using the qualities of information theory, the more comfortable they'll be with that idea that, we keep calling back disruption, and disruption is when the unknown comes to you. But exploration is when you go into the unknown, and that gives us a sense of agency. And if we can impart that to people, and they can impart the learning process, that will make them just far more engaged and wanting to learn and not seeing AI as a mystery. And I think uncovering just as I think the great thing that the connections did was it opened your eyes to, oh my God, This is all around us. This is here. This is. I can understood it. I can get in amongst it. I can see these processes, and it puts you in a driving seat and gives you much more of a sense of agency, which I think people are going to absolutely crave more and more without feeling that AI is disrupting and overwhelming them. That's my spiel, all off the top of my head. As I said, I'm far with a much more structured, where we'd be able to go through a whole what we want to do, beginning, middle, end, to create a proper narrative. But if you're interested, that's my pitch. A lot more of an elevator pitch than 30 seconds, but I think there's a real thing here. I can see an information surprise in and of itself. That's it. Hope you found this interesting, Britt. If not, please feel free to delete, run away to the hills. And that's it. I shall let you go. Thank you for watching. It's really much appreciated.